The morning sun cast long shadows across the barren landscape as General Morrison surveyed the scene through his binoculars. His jaw clenched with frustration as he watched the enemy position remain untouched, despite 13 failed attempts. The target sat mockingly on a distant ridge exactly 4,000 meters away, seemingly impossible to reach with conventional weapons. "Sir, we've tried everything," Sergeant Williams reported, wiping sweat from his brow. "Our best marksmen have taken their shots. Johnson missed by 6 meters, Martinez by 4. Even our specialized sniper unit couldn't get close enough to matter." The general lowered his binoculars and turned to face his assembled troops. These were battle-hardened soldiers, men who had seen action across multiple theaters of war. Yet here they stood, defeated by distance and precision requirements that seemed to mock their training. "The enemy knows exactly where we are," Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions. "Every minute we wait here gives them more time to reinforce their position. That observation post is feeding them intelligence about our entire operation." Behind the military lines, civilian evacuees had been gathering since dawn. Among them was Elena Vasquez, a 42-year-old woman who had spent most of her life in the mountain villages of her homeland. She carried only a small backpack and wore simple clothes that had seen better days. Her weathered hands spoke of years spent working the land, and her steady eyes held the calm patience of someone who had faced hardship before. Elena had been listening to the soldiers' conversations while waiting for transport to the safe zone. She understood the gravity of their situation better than most civilians might. Her village had been under siege for weeks before the military arrived, and she had seen what happened when enemy spotters remained in position. The general walked among his men, studying each face. "Any snipers here?" he asked, his voice cutting through the morning air. "Anyone with long-range experience we haven't tried yet?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Soldiers exchanged glances, but no one stepped forward. They had already deployed their most skilled marksmen. The distance was simply too great for standard military rifles, and the environmental factors made the shot nearly impossible. Elena stepped closer to the military perimeter, her movement catching the attention of a young private. "Ma'am, you need to stay back with the other civilians," he said gently, but she held up her hand. "I heard your general asking about snipers," she said in accented but clear English. "I might be able to help." The private looked confused. This woman, with her worn clothes and calloused hands, hardly looked like military material. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but this is a military operation." "I've been hunting in these mountains for 30 years, Elena continued calmly. "I know wind patterns here better than anyone. I know how bullets behave at this altitude." Word of the civilian woman's offer quickly reached the command level. Officers gathered around, some barely suppressing smirks at the suggestion. Here was a simple mountain woman claiming she could succeed where their trained professionals had failed. General Morrison approached Elena directly. His stern expression softened slightly as he took in her serious demeanor. "Ma'am, I appreciate your willingness to help, but we're dealing with military-grade equipment and extreme long-range targeting." Elena nodded respectfully. "General, my grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. Not for sport, but for survival. In these mountains, if you miss your shot at game, your family might go hungry. I've never missed an important shot." The general studied her face, searching for any sign of bravado or false confidence. Instead, he found only quiet determination and the kind of steady resolve that comes from necessity rather than training. "The target is 4,000 meters away," he said slowly. "That's over 2 miles. Even our specialized equipment struggled with that distance." "I've taken deer at 2,500 meters with iron sights," Elena replied simply. "With proper equipment and understanding of these specific wind conditions, 4,000 meters is challenging but not impossible." The assembled soldiers fell silent. They had heard tales of legendary mountain hunters, but seeing one in person was different. There was something in Elena's manner that suggested she wasn't making empty boasts. General Morrison found himself facing an unprecedented decision. His trained soldiers had failed repeatedly, time was running short, and now a civilian was offering to attempt what his military experts couldn't achieve. The logical part of his mind said it was ridiculous, but something in Elena's quiet confidence made him hesitate. "What makes you think you can succeed where 13 trained marksmen have failed?" he asked. Elena looked toward the distant ridge, then back at the general. "Because I know these mountains and I know that wind. Your soldiers are fighting against conditions they don't understand. I've lived with these conditions my entire life. General Morrison stared at Elena for a long moment, weighing impossible odds against desperate necessity. Around them, his officers waited tensely for his decision. Some were already shaking their heads, convinced this was a waste of precious time they couldn't afford. "Colonel Hayes," the general called to his second-in-command, "what's our ammunition situation for long-range attempts?" "We have maybe 6 rounds left that are suitable for this distance, sir. After that, we'd need to call for resupply, which could take hours we don't have." Elena listened to this exchange with growing understanding of their predicament. She had assumed the military would have unlimited resources, but clearly even they faced constraints in this remote location. "If I may, General," she said quietly, "I would only need 1 shot." Several officers couldn't contain their skepticism any longer. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Captain Rodriguez interjected, "this isn't hunting rabbits in your backyard. We're talking about military precision under combat conditions." Elena turned to face the captain directly. "You're right, it's not hunting rabbits. It's much easier. Rabbits move unpredictably and quickly. That observation post hasn't moved in 3 hours." The simplicity of her logic caught the military men off guard. They had been approaching this as a complex military problem, but Elena saw it as a practical challenge with known variables. "Tell me about the failed attempts," Elena asked the general. "Where did the shots land?" Sergeant Williams consulted his notes. "Most fell short by 200 to 300 meters. 2 went wide left, 1 went wide right. The closest was Johnson's shot, which landed about 150 meters short and 50 meters to the right." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "What time of day were these shots taken?" "Between 800 and 10:30 hours, Williams replied. "That explains the pattern," Elena said with confidence that surprised everyone. "Morning thermals in this valley create updrafts that peak around around 900. Your bullets were fighting rising air currents. Plus, there's a crosswind from the northwest that strengthens as the sun heats the rock faces." Colonel Hayes leaned forward, suddenly interested. "How could you know that so precisely?" "I've lived here for 42 years, Elena answered simply. "I know how air moves through this valley at every hour of every season. In winter, I hunt at dawn because the air is still. In summer, the best hunting is just after sunset when the thermals settle." General Morrison found himself reconsidering. Military training was comprehensive, but it couldn't replace decades of local environmental knowledge. "What would you do differently?" Elena studied the distant target through the general's binoculars. "First, we wait until the thermals calm, probably around 1400 hours. Second, we adjust for the prevailing wind, which your soldiers seem to have underestimated. Third, we account for the altitude difference and the way bullets behave in thin mountain air." "And you can calculate all that?" Captain Rodriguez asked, his skepticism wavering. "I don't calculate it," Elena replied. "I feel it. When you've spent 30 years reading wind and weather to put food on your family's table, you develop instincts that no amount of classroom training can provide." The general walked a few steps away, considering his options. His military advisors were divided between those who thought this was desperate foolishness and those who recognized they had exhausted conventional alternatives. "Elena," he said, returning to face her, "if I give you this opportunity, you understand the stakes? Lives depend on neutralizing that position." "I understand, General. People in my village died because we couldn't stop enemy spotters from calling in artillery strikes. I know exactly what's at stake." Her voice carried a gravity that silenced any remaining doubts about her motivation. This wasn't a civilian seeking adventure or glory. This was someone who had experienced firsthand the consequences of leaving enemy positions intact. "What equipment would you need?" Morrison asked. "Your best rifle, but I'd need to test it first. Different rifles have different personalities. I need to understand how this one shoots before attempting the real target." Sergeant Williams brought over their finest precision rifle, a military-grade weapon capable of extreme accuracy in the right hands. Elena examined it carefully, checking the scope alignment and feeling the weapon's balance. "This is a good rifle," she said approvingly, "but I'll need to fire a few practice rounds to understand its characteristics." "We can spare 3 rounds for testing," Colonel Hayes said. "But that's all." Elena accepted the rifle and 3 rounds of ammunition. "I'll need a stable shooting position, something that lets me stay comfortable for potentially several hours while waiting for optimal conditions." The soldiers quickly constructed a proper shooting rest using available materials. Elena settled into position, taking time to adjust everything to her satisfaction. She was methodical and patient, traits that impressed the watching military personnel. Range to practice target? She asked, indicating a large rock formation about 800 meters away. 793 meters, came the precise measurement. Elena loaded the first round and settled behind the scope. She spent several minutes just observing, reading the air currents and feeling the rifle's balance. When she finally fired, the bullet struck the rock formation dead center. The watching soldiers exchanged surprised glances. 800 meters was not an easy shot, yet she had made it look routine. 2 more practice rounds, Elena said calmly, as if she hadn't just demonstrated exceptional marksmanship. I need to understand this rifle's pattern. Her second shot landed within inches of the first. The third shot created a tiny triangle with the previous 2, all within a space smaller than a dinner plate at nearly 800 meters distance. General Morrison no longer doubted Elena's shooting ability. The question now was whether anyone could make a shot at 4,000 meters, regardless of their skill level. What makes you think you can succeed where 13 trained marksmen have failed? He asked. Elena looked toward the distant ridge, then back at the general. Because I know these mountains and I know that wind. Your soldiers are fighting against conditions they don't understand. I've lived with these conditions my entire life. Word of Elena's practice shots spread quickly through the military ranks. Soldiers who had been skeptical now gathered at respectful distances to observe this unexpected development. The tight grouping at 800 meters had earned their attention, but 4,000 meters remained an entirely different challenge. Elena spent the next hour studying the target area through various optical equipment. She borrowed rangefinders, wind meters, and atmospheric measuring devices, correlating their readings with her own sensory observations. Her approach fascinated the military specialists, who watched her combine high-tech measurements with seemingly intuitive assessments. The humidity is dropping, she announced to General Morrison around noon. That's good for bullet flight, but we still need to wait for the thermal currents to settle. Captain Rodriguez, who had become genuinely curious about her methods, asked, How do you read thermal currents without instruments? Elena pointed to distant dust patterns and the behavior of small debris caught in air movements. See how those leaves are spiraling upward near the cliff face? That shows rising air. Watch the dust clouds. They're still being pushed around too much for a precise shot. She had transformed from a simple refugee into an impromptu instructor, sharing knowledge that couldn't be found in any military manual. Her explanations revealed an understanding of ballistics that had developed through necessity rather than formal education. In my village, we had 1 rifle and limited ammunition, Elena continued. Every shot had to count. You learn to read conditions perfectly, or your children go hungry. Military training teaches you to shoot under various conditions, but mountain hunting teaches you to wait for perfect conditions. Colonel Hayes found himself taking notes. What else affects accuracy at extreme range? Barometric pressure, which is changing as clouds move in from the west. Temperature gradients between here and the target. Even the rotation of the Earth matters at this distance, though most people don't realize it. The soldiers exchanged glances. Elena was casually discussing the Coriolis effect, an advanced ballistic consideration that some of them had only learned about recently. My grandfather fought in the old wars, Elena explained. He taught me that patience is the sniper's greatest weapon. American soldiers are brave and well-trained, but sometimes you focus so much on taking action that you forget the value of waiting for the right moment. General Morrison checked his watch. Time pressure was mounting, but Elena's confidence about optimal timing was convincing him to trust her judgment. When do you think conditions will be ideal? Elena studied the sky and felt the air currents with practiced attention. Another 2 hours, maybe less. The afternoon wind shift is starting, but it hasn't stabilized yet. When it does, we'll have a window of maybe 20 minutes with consistent conditions. 20 minutes? Sergeant Williams asked. That's not much time. It's enough for 1 shot, Elena replied simply. But we have to be ready to take it immediately when the moment comes. She began preparing mentally and physically for the attempt. Elena checked and rechecked the rifle, familiarizing herself with every aspect of its operation. She practiced her breathing techniques and visualized the shot sequence dozens of times. I need to understand the target better, she said. Can you show me detailed images? Through a high-powered spotting scope, Elena studied the enemy observation post intently. She noted wind indicators near the target. the exact positioning of equipment, and any environmental factors that might affect bullet impact. There's a flag near their position, she observed. Small, but it shows wind direction at the target end. That's crucial for this distance. Captain Rodriguez was impressed by her attention to detail. Our previous shooters focused mainly on range calculations. Range is only one factor, Elena explained. Wind direction can change between here and there. Temperature differences affect bullet speed. Even small variations in air density matter at 4,000 meters. As afternoon approached, Elena's prediction about wind patterns proved accurate. The morning thermals gradually settled and the crosswinds began stabilizing into a more predictable pattern. It's starting, she announced quietly. The air is beginning to settle into afternoon patterns. Elena moved into her final shooting position. She had spent the waiting time arranging everything perfectly. Rifle rest, body position, ammunition placement, and backup equipment. Nothing was left to chance. General, I need everyone to remain very still once I begin the final preparation, she requested. Any vibration or movement could affect the shot. The assembled soldiers, many of whom had initially doubted this civilian woman, now watched with respectful silence. Elena's demonstration of expertise and patient preparation had won their confidence. How will you account for the bullet drop at that distance? Colonel Hayes asked quietly. The scope is adjusted for 1,000 meters, Elena replied. At 4,000 meters, the bullet will drop approximately 400 inches below the line of sight. I'll aim that high above the target. 400 inches? Williams calculated quickly. That's over 30 feet. Exactly. Most people can't visualize shooting that high above a target, which is why this shot seems impossible. But if you understand trajectory physics, it's just mathematics combined with environmental reading. Elena settled behind the rifle scope and began her final observations. The wind flag near the target was moving in a steady pattern now, indicating stabilizing conditions. Dust patterns showed reducing thermal activity. Conditions are approaching optimal, she announced. Another 15 minutes, maybe less. The tension among the watching soldiers was palpable. 13 trained marksmen had failed at this distance. Now everything depended on a mountain woman whose qualification was 30 years of subsistence hunting. Elena controlled her breathing and entered the focused mental state she had cultivated over decades of hunting. This shot would determine whether the mission succeeded or failed, whether her military protectors could advance safely, or remain pinned down by enemy observation. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but Elena had faced life-or-death shooting situations before. The stakes were higher now, but the fundamental challenge remained the same. Read the conditions perfectly, wait for the ideal moment, and deliver one perfect shot. Elena's breathing became measured and controlled as she entered the shooting zone. Around her, military personnel maintained absolute silence, understanding that the next few minutes would determine the success or failure of their entire operation. The afternoon sun had shifted to create optimal lighting conditions, and the wind patterns had stabilized exactly as she had predicted. Wind is steady from the northwest at approximately 8 kilometers per hour, she murmured, more to herself than to the observers. Temperature differential between here and target is minimal. Barometric pressure is stable. Through the scope, Elena could see the enemy observation post with crystal clarity. 2 figures moved occasionally within the fortified position, unaware that they were being targeted from an impossible distance. The small flag near their position fluttered consistently, confirming her wind calculations. General Morrison watched through his own binoculars, knowing that this moment would either vindicate his unprecedented decision to trust a civilian or result in complete mission failure. His trained snipers had exhausted their ammunition trying to make this shot, and now everything depended on a woman who learned marksmanship from her grandfather in these same mountains. Thermal activity is minimal. Elena continued her environmental assessment. Bullet flight path is clear. All conditions are approaching optimal. She had been behind the scope for nearly an hour, studying every detail of the target area and waiting for the perfect moment. Unlike the previous military attempts which had been taken under time pressure, Elena was waiting for nature to provide ideal shooting conditions. I can see their radio antenna clearly, she reported. That's my aiming point. If I hit the antenna, it will disable their communications even if I miss the personnel. This practical approach impressed the watching soldiers. Elena wasn't just attempting a spectacular shot. She was thinking tactically about how to achieve the mission objective. The rifle was perfectly zeroed and adjusted for the extreme range. Elena had calculated the bullet drop, wind drift, and even the slight effect of the Earth's rotation at this distance. Her breathing was steady, her pulse controlled, and her mental focus absolute. "Conditions are optimal now," she announced quietly. "I'm taking the shot." Elena's finger moved to the trigger as she aligned the crosshairs precisely on her chosen aiming point, approximately 30 feet above the actual target to compensate for bullet drop. The mathematics of ballistics merged with 30 years of hunting instinct as she made final micro-adjustments. The watching soldiers held their breath collectively. 4,000 meters away, an enemy spotter continued his observations, completely unaware that death was traveling toward him at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Elena squeezed the trigger with the smooth, controlled pressure that had become second nature over decades of hunting. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder as the specially selected round began its journey across the valley. For 4.8 seconds, the bullet flew through mountain air, fighting gravity and wind while maintaining enough velocity to remain lethal at the target. Elena remained perfectly still behind the scope, tracking the bullet's theoretical path and waiting for impact confirmation. The soldiers watching through various optical devices saw it first, a small puff of dust and debris from the enemy position, followed immediately by the collapse of their radio antenna. Through the spotting scopes, they could see confusion and alarm among the enemy personnel as they realized they were under accurate fire from an impossible distance. "Target hit," Colonel Hayes announced with barely contained excitement. "The antenna is down and I can see personnel scrambling for cover." Elena remained calm behind the rifle, continuing to observe through the scope. "Clean hit on the communications equipment," she confirmed. "Secondary damage to the observation platform. Enemy capability is neutralized." The military personnel erupted in cheers and congratulations, but Elena simply set the rifle down and stood up slowly. For her, this had been just another shot, admittedly at unprecedented range, but fundamentally no different from the thousands of shots she had taken over the years to feed her family. "Outstanding work," General Morrison said, approaching Elena with genuine respect. "That was the most remarkable display of marksmanship I've ever witnessed." Elena nodded politely, but seemed almost puzzled by the celebration. "It was a good shot," she agreed simply. The conditions were favorable and the rifle performed well. Sergeant Williams was studying the ballistic calculations on his computer. "Ma'am, according to our measurements, that bullet traveled for nearly 5 seconds and dropped over 30 feet before impact. The precision required for that shot is almost beyond calculation. Precision comes from understanding your environment," Elena replied. "I know how air moves in this valley, how bullets behave at this altitude, and how to read wind patterns. Your soldiers are skilled, but they were fighting against conditions they didn't fully understand." The successful shot had immediate tactical benefits. Enemy communications from the observation post ceased entirely, and intelligence reports indicated confusion and withdrawal from the position. Elena's single shot had accomplished what 13 previous attempts could not. Captain Rodriguez approached with obvious admiration. "Elena, that was one of the longest confirmed sniper kills in military history. Would you consider working with our training programs to teach these techniques?" Elena smiled but shook her head. "I'm not a soldier, Captain. I'm just a woman who learned to shoot out of necessity. Now that this is finished, I want to return to my village and rebuild what the war destroyed." Her humility impressed the soldiers even more than her marksmanship had. Elena had accomplished something extraordinary, but she viewed it simply as doing what needed to be done. "The shot will be officially recorded," General Morrison informed her. "Your name will be associated with one of the most remarkable achievements in military history." Elena seemed more concerned with practical matters. "Will this help end the fighting in this area? Can people return to their homes safely now?" "Thanks to your shot, yes," the general assured her. "The enemy observation capability in this sector has been eliminated. Our forces can advance safely, and civilian evacuations can proceed without artillery harassment." For Elena, this news was worth more than any military recognition. She had taken the shot not for glory or records, but to protect her community and help end the violence that had displaced so many families. News of Elena's extraordinary shot spread rapidly through military communications networks. Within hours, reports were reaching command centers across multiple countries, describing how a civilian refugee had accomplished what an entire sniper unit could not. The story seemed almost impossible to believe, yet the evidence was undeniable. Military analysts immediately began studying the ballistic data from Elena's shot. The combination of distance, environmental conditions, and single-shot success created a case study that would be examined for years to come. Advanced computer models confirmed that the shot required perfect calculation of multiple variables that most shooters would never even consider. Command wants a full debrief on how this was accomplished. Colonel Hayes informed General Morrison. They're particularly interested in Elena's environmental reading techniques. Elena, meanwhile, seemed more interested in the immediate humanitarian impact of her success. With the enemy observation post neutralized, military operations could proceed more safely, and civilian evacuations could continue without the constant threat of artillery strikes guided by enemy spotters. General, when can the displaced families begin returning to their villages? She asked during the post-mission discussion. Thanks to your shot, we can begin securing the area immediately, Morrison replied. What you accomplished today will save dozens of lives and allow hundreds of families to return home safely. Word of Elena's achievement reached the civilian refugees who had been waiting for transport to safe areas. Many of them were from her own village and surrounding communities. They gathered around her with expressions of amazement and gratitude, understanding better than the military personnel what her success meant for their future. Elena did what our soldiers could not, whispered an elderly man from her village.
She has given us back our homes. But Elena remained focused on practical concerns rather than celebrating her marksmanship achievement.
She spent time talking with other refugees about returning to their villages, discussing which areas were now safe and what resources would be needed for rebuilding. The war damaged many homes. She told General Morrison, people will need construction materials and tools to rebuild. Will the military be able to help with that? Her priorities impressed the officers who had witnessed her remarkable shot. Even after achieving something that would make military history, Elena's thoughts centered on community welfare rather than personal recognition. Military photographers wanted to document the scene and interview Elena for official records, but she politely declined most requests. I did what needed to be done, she said simply. Now I want to help my neighbors return home. Captain Rodriguez approached Elena with a formal request. The military would like to offer you a position as a civilian contractor, teaching environmental shooting techniques to our sniper training programs. The compensation would be substantial. Elena considered this offer carefully. Captain, I appreciate the honor, but my place is with my people. We have crops to replant, houses to rebuild, and communities to restore. That's more important to me than teaching soldiers. Her refusal of military employment, despite the significant financial opportunity, further demonstrated the character that had enabled her extraordinary achievement. Elena had not taken the shot for personal gain, but out of necessity and community loyalty. The tactical impact of her success became clear within hours. Enemy forces in the region, deprived of their primary observation post, began withdrawing from advanced positions. Military intelligence reported confusion and reduced coordination. Among enemy units, your shot has created a significant tactical advantage, Sergeant Williams informed Elena. Enemy. Communications in this entire sector have been disrupted. Elena nodded but seemed more interested in a different aspect of the situation. Does this mean the fighting will end soon? Can families start returning to normal life? General Morrison explained that while her shot was tactically significant, the broader conflict would continue. However, this particular region would likely see reduced violence and could begin the process of civilian resettlement. You've given your community a chance to rebuild, he told her. That may be more valuable than any military victory. Elena spent her final evening at the military base helping organize the return of civilian refugees to their villages. She used her knowledge of local conditions and damaged infrastructure to advise military planners about the safest routes and most urgent humanitarian needs. Some bridges were destroyed, she explained while reviewing maps with logistics officers. But there are mountain paths that vehicles can use. The old shepherd routes are still passable. Her practical knowledge proved as valuable for post-conflict planning as her marksmanship had been for military operations. Elena understood the local geography, community needs, and logistical challenges in ways that military maps and intelligence reports could not capture. As preparations continued for civilian resettlement, Elena received messages of thanks from military units throughout the region. Her single shot had eliminated a major threat and allowed operations to proceed with reduced casualties. "Soldiers I'll never meet will go home safely because of what you accomplished today," General Morrison told her. "That's the real measure of your achievement." Elena accepted these thanks graciously but remained focused on the future rather than dwelling on her remarkable accomplishment. She had taken an impossible shot under extraordinary circumstances, but her greater concern was ensuring that such desperate measures would never again be necessary. "I hope my grandchildren will never need to learn to shoot like this," she said quietly. "I hope they can use these mountains for farming and herding, not for war." The contrast between Elena's extraordinary marksmanship abilities and her simple desire for peaceful community life captured the attention of everyone who met her. She had demonstrated remarkable skill under pressure, then immediately returned to focusing on basic human needs and community welfare. Military historians were already beginning to document Elena's achievement, recognizing it as one of the most remarkable shooting accomplishments in recorded history. But Elena herself seemed more interested in the practical outcomes than the historical significance of what she had done. 3 months after Elena's remarkable shot, the mountain valley had begun returning to peaceful life. The enemy observation post remained abandoned, and military operations had successfully secured the region for civilian resettlement. Families had returned to their villages, and the sound of reconstruction replaced the echoes of warfare. Elena stood in her rebuilt kitchen preparing lunch for her family who had finally returned home. Through her window, she could see the distant ridge where the enemy position had once threatened their safety. The view that had once represented danger now simply showed familiar mountains where her grandfather had taught her to hunt decades ago. A military jeep approached her modest home, and Elena recognized General Morrison stepping out with several officers. She wiped her hands on her apron and went out to greet them, curious about this unexpected visit. "Elena, I hope we're not disturbing you," the general said respectfully. "We wanted to update you on how your shot changed things in this region." Elena invited them to sit on her simple porch, offering water from her well. The contrast between this peaceful domestic scene and the military tension of 3 months earlier was striking. The enemy never re-established observation capability in this sector, Colonel Hayes reported. "Your shot eliminated their primary intelligence gathering point, and they haven't been able to replace it effectively." Elena nodded with satisfaction. "Good. That means families can live safely here again." "There's more," General Morrison continued. "Military analysis has confirmed that your shot ranks among the longest successful sniper engagements in recorded history. The combination of distance, environmental conditions, and single-shot success makes it truly extraordinary." Elena seemed more interested in practical outcomes than historical records. "Has the fighting ended completely in our region?" "Yes," the general confirmed. "This area has been officially designated as a peaceful zone. Normal civilian life can resume without military concerns." This news clearly pleased Elena more than any discussion of her marksmanship achievement. She had taken the shot to protect her community, and learning that the protection had been successful was the only recognition she truly wanted. "We have a request," Captain Rodriguez said carefully. "Military training programs around the world want to study your techniques, not just your shooting but your environmental reading abilities and patience under pressure." Elena shook her head gently. "Captain, I've told you before. My knowledge comes from living in these mountains for 40 years. You can't teach that in a classroom or training program. But surely some aspects could be shared," Colonel Hayes suggested. "Your understanding of wind patterns, temperature effects, and patience techniques could benefit military personnel." Elena considered this thoughtfully. "What I know comes from necessity. When you must feed your family with limited ammunition, you learn to read conditions perfectly and wait for the right moment. Soldiers have different pressures and different objectives." She stood and walked to the edge of her porch, looking out over the valley where children now played safely in areas that had been dangerous combat zones just months earlier. "I can tell you this," Elena said finally. "Marksmanship isn't about equipment or training programs. It's about understanding your environment completely and respecting the responsibility of taking a life even in warfare." The military officers listened respectfully as Elena continued. "Every shot I've ever taken, whether hunting for food or protecting my community, carried the weight of consequences. That responsibility makes you careful, patient, and precise. General Morrison nodded in understanding. Your approach was different from our trained snipers. They focused on technique and equipment, but you understood the total environment. Mountain people learn to work with nature, not against it, Elena explained. Your soldiers are brave and skilled, but they try to overcome difficult conditions rather than waiting for favorable ones. A group of children from the village ran past Elena's house, laughing and playing games that would have been impossible during the conflict. Elena smiled watching them, clearly finding more satisfaction in their safe play than in any military honors. Elena, one final thing, General Morrison said. There's been discussion of recommending you for a civilian commendation, recognizing your contribution to ending the conflict in this region. Elena waved this suggestion away politely. General, I don't need awards or recognition. I took that shot to protect my neighbors and family. Seeing them safe and happy is all the recognition I want. The simplicity of her motivation continued to impress the military personnel. Elena had accomplished something extraordinary, yet she viewed it merely as doing what the situation required. Your shot will be studied and remembered, Colonel Hayes said. It represents one of the most remarkable achievements in military history. Elena nodded politely but seemed to consider this less important than other matters. I hope it's also remembered as the last shot that was necessary in this valley. I hope future generations won't need to learn these skills. As the military officers prepared to leave, Elena walked them back to their vehicle. Thank you for protecting our region and helping families return home safely, she said. That meant more to us than you might realize. General Morrison shook Elena's hand with genuine respect. Thank you for showing us that sometimes the most effective solutions come from unexpected sources. Your knowledge and courage made the difference when all our training and equipment couldn't. Elena watched the military jeep drive away, then returned to her kitchen to finish preparing lunch for her family. The impossible shot that had made military history was, for her, simply one day's work in a life dedicated to protecting and providing for her community. In the distance, the abandoned enemy position remained silent on its ridge, a reminder of the day when a simple mountain woman accomplished what 13 trained snipers could not. But Elena's attention was focused on the present and future, on rebuilding, replanting, and ensuring that her valley would remain a place where children could play safely under the mountain sky.